Welcome to another edition of Crosstalk, the 7th Plymouth District edition. My name is Kevin Tocci, and joining me to my left, probably your right, is State Representative Geoff Diehl, who is joining us once again, sir.
Kevin, thanks for having me on.
Nice and tanned. You've been busy, out and about. Folks may or may not know, but Geoff is a candidate for U.S. Senate, and we'll chat with him a little bit about that. But we'll also kind of get some idea as to what's still going on. He's still serving as your state representative in East Bridgewater, Abington, and right here in Whitman.
This is the last one, the last month of me in office, however. So it's been a good 8-year run.
Bittersweet?
It's tough. It's tough leaving the work I've been doing as state representative, representing 3 towns, great towns, like you mentioned, Abington, Whitman, 3 precincts of East Bridgewater. I basically feel like it's all of East Bridgewater, you know. But it has been an honor to be elected back in 2010, and now working to run for the U.S. Senate seat.
And you were kind of chatting, talking about how many parades did you do in the past week?
Yeah, so 4th of July is big around this state, and there was the Gloucester Parade the night before the 4th. I was also in Braintree a few days before that, but on the 4th of July, Plymouth and Duxbury and Wakefield. So it's great. When you go around the state and you get to march with people and talk to and shake, hundreds and hundreds of hands and talk to people, it's really fun. It's fun, but it's also important because I think it's nice to see everybody out there celebrating America, celebrating the birth of our country, our independence, and at the same time, everybody has an eye towards November because the political season is pretty much upon us.
Sure.
4 months now before the election, and I think a lot of folks are looking to see who's out there marching and talking to them.
Yeah, and you were kind of saying that folks recognize you. People know you by name, which is almost like walking into chairs. Everybody knows your name.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's really the wild part is that when you represent 3 towns, but you're going all over the state and people pop out of the crowd and they come up and they say, we really want you to win. It's nice, but it's also important because the work you're trying to do for them, it's beyond just shaking hands. It's trying to deliver for them a lot of different things. You want to make sure that they can afford to stay here in Massachusetts. Their kids can stay here. Their grandkids can grow up around them. And it feels like there's a lot of pressure because right now, Washington, there's a lot of finger pointing. A lot of people, whether you're an independent or Democrat or Republican, I think a lot of people out there are very upset with the way things are going down in Washington. And I think they're looking for someone who's going to go down there and actually put them first. And with my time here in the legislature on Beacon Hill, I've always tried to make sure the people of my district have come first, trying to make sure that the dollars we spend, your tax dollars, go where they're supposed to be going. And so now it's just on a bigger level.
I got to just say this just for the record is I follow some of the folks who are working on your campaign. There was one thing that was notable that actually one of the folks who work on your campaign was actually tracked down for one of your bumper stickers. How does that make you feel?
Yeah, no, I mean, again, it's very surrealistic to have your name out there on lawn signs and on bumper stickers, not just in your district, when you're running for state rep, but really across the state. And then you start doing national media. You get on television, big networks, and you're talking, and people start to know you around the country. So it is an interesting process, but again, it's important because if you really are going down to Washington to serve on behalf of the people, you have to be able to withstand all the questions you're going to be asked, the scrutiny that you're going to have. And like I said, I've been very used to doing what I can for the people of the 3 towns here. I think this is an opportunity to do something not just for Massachusetts, give them a voice down in Washington, but also try to put this country back on track. We really seem to be going down a path that I'm not sure a lot of people are very happy with on either side of the aisle. And it's culminating in calls for elimination of federal departments that are trying to keep us safe. I think we'll talk about that maybe a little bit later. But, I just think that right now people are disappointed in the elected leaders, and they're looking for someone who I think has a track record of delivering for them. And whether it was repealing the indexing of the gas tax to keep more money in your pocket, or trying to prevent the Olympics from coming and taking a lot of money from Massachusetts. Right. Those are things that I'm proud to have been working on, but at the same time, even recent bills up on the Beacon Hill, like a sexual harassment bill, I was able to get an amendment in to prevent taxpayers from having to pay out any settlements if there was a legislator who had a sexual harassment bill. I don't know if people know this, but in Washington, there was a slush fund. Millions of dollars were being paid out, and people didn't even know it. So I wanted to make sure that in Massachusetts we don't have similar slush funds for our politicians that cross the line, because we have had some recent incidents of politicians crossing the line. And so, that was something that just recently got adopted. But look, there's quite a bit to do in Massachusetts, in Washington, D.C., and I'm just looking forward to talking to a lot more people before November.
Talking about things closer to home, still while you were wearing the hat as a state representative, we were waiting for things to come out of conference committee in regards to the FY19 budget. What are your thoughts on where things stand with that?
Well, what's interesting is right now, the current budget for FY19, we're in pretty good financial shape. I mean, there is a lot of always squabbling about where the money is going to go. But the good news is the tax reform bill that passed federally back in 2017, which, by the way, my opponent, Elizabeth Warren, did vote against. I just want to remind people because that gave 80% of Massachusetts residents a tax cut. Massachusetts now has $991 million in unanticipated revenue from over last year, same time last year. A lot of that's due to the fact that businesses have been able to expand, hire more people, so we're taking in more payroll taxes. We are increasing our output as far as businesses. We're having more success as a state in general, and that's given us almost $1 billion in new revenue to the state, which wouldn't have happened had that tax reform bill not passed back in the end of 2017. So, look, I think that's why people need to realize elections have consequences, and who you vote for at the local level and at the federal level are going to be important on what happens with your own household budget.
Last I knew that there was a little bit of while both bottom lines for the Senate and the House were very similar, some of the expenditures, I want to say close to $500 million, was somehow being accounted for differently. What do you know about that?
Well, look, I mean, what always happens is that the governor has a certain budget that's fairly lean, the House tends to add a few more dollars, and the Senate tends to pack in a few more dollars than that. Of course, it goes back to the House. We have yet to get the House the budget back to the House now from the Senate. It's actually taken longer than anticipated. And then, of course, it goes to the governors for signature, and then, of course, it goes from there to potential veto overrides if he tries to veto anything. So I think that any financial discrepancies we're going to be debating in the House in the next week or two. Have to get back to you on some of that. But what I will say, one thing that was inserted into the Senate budget, I think that's concerning a lot of people, is an amendment that changed our state laws to keep law enforcement from working with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, which I think I'd mentioned just a few minutes ago. The Senate has a version that basically would prevent law enforcement from sharing data that would allow ICE to do their job in identifying and deporting those who are here illegally that are committing crimes additionally while they're here in the state. And so one of the things I certainly plan on doing is voting against the Senate budget if it still contains that. I'm hoping that we can strip that out in the House version that goes back out.
And is this something that Democratic leaders have put in there? Or is this something that made it from the governor's House 1 budget and worked its way through each branch of government?
No, this came from the Senate. So it went from the governor to the House to the Senate. The Senate inserted this, and it's going to come back to the House. And again, a couple years ago, Representative Lyons and Representative O'Connell of Taunton and I, all three of us voted against the budget when it contained driver's licenses for illegal immigrants. We felt that created an unaccountability, with our driver's license program, which, by the way, not only did we not end up going that direction, we went the other way and switched to Real ID, which is good because that's a national ID for driver's licenses, which creates a national shared database. And what you want to do is make sure that, again, you're not giving licenses to those here illegally that are committing crimes, and that's a problem. Secondly, we were concerned that the driver's licenses themselves might be used for identification purposes to claim housing or benefits that maybe they may not be entitled to. And so, what we want to do is make sure that those who deserve to get state help get that help, but we want to make sure that we aren't just a state that is people are coming to this state, this country for the wrong reasons, just to get benefits and then perhaps send them back, send the cash back home. We want people to be here in the United States, in Massachusetts. I'm all for immigration, legal immigration, so long as people want to become citizens and become a vital part of our Commonwealth. And you want to make sure that we don't have loopholes in the law that prevent that. And again, this goes back to why I'm very concerned about the Senate version of the budget coming back to the House. That's going to be a debate on whether or not we keep ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, from being able to do their job. And just so you know, we've got people, MS-13 gang members, 61 members were rounded up in Boston about 3 months ago and prosecuted. I've been told now by law enforcement that there is MS-13 gang members operating on the island of Nantucket. They're the only gang in the United States that's designated as a terrorist unit because they meet all the qualifications of terrorist organizations. They have multiple organizations in different cities across the United States. They have a funding source, and they have, they meet certain criteria that make them something that is basically trackable as, like I said, a terrorist organization. So we want to make sure that those guys aren't here operating and victimizing the immigrant community, because that's what they end up doing, is tracking down family members in the countries that they came from and threatening to kill the family members if the young people in the state don't act as drug dealers for the drugs they're bringing in or other criminal activity they're doing.
You mentioned about the Real ID. I think you actually posted something on social media. Did you not recently go through the whole process yourself, or did you know somebody that did?
Well, my daughter just got her driver's license. I don't know if that was what you saw posted on social media, but no, Real ID was something that was enacted, I believe it was 3 years ago under Governor Baker. And again, what it does is the reason we had to go to Real ID really was because the federal government was threatening to not allow Massachusetts licenses to be used for entrance to federal buildings or on commercial flights.
Right.
Because the problem was Massachusetts licenses were susceptible to a lot of fraud.
Right.
Well, right, people who shouldn't get them getting them. And so we, like I said, did not go towards licenses for illegals, and we ended up going the other direction and making sure we had the most secure licenses. So that was actually a good step forward.
But Massachusetts is similar like California when it comes to, give you an example, emissions. We're tough on emissions, as is the state of California. It seems as though we're always leading the nation in a lot of different areas. So it's interesting that you bring that up.
Yeah, no, look, the RGGI agreements for what we're doing for emission standards for businesses, we lead the country in doing that. I think that's why when there was the Paris Climate Accords, I was supporting pulling out. I think that our country, state by state or region by region, can certainly determine that. A global pact that made the United States basically on the hook for about $3 trillion when countries like China weren't even obligated to join the pact for another 10, 20 years, made no sense whatsoever. So look, I'm an Eagle Scout. I always believed in, and still do, leaving the campground better than you found it, and that includes environmentally. But we got to make sure that we make our decisions, at a more local level that work for us. Whether it's the fishing waters off our coast or whether it's the factories in Massachusetts, I think we do a pretty good job in the New England area of making sure that we keep clean air, clean water, and sustainable energy like wind, solar, hydroelectric. We pretty much pioneered that, and we have to. To be honest with you, Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant is going to be shutting down very soon.
Next year.
That's 19% of our state's energy. Yep. We're going to have to find energy sources elsewhere, and it can't be, I hate to say this, all renewables. Unfortunately, they only accommodate for about 5 to 10% at most of the energy that can be produced. So we're going to have to find other ways of bringing in energy, and I think that's going to be a discussion down in Washington as to how to help Massachusetts get more energy.
It's interesting you bring that up, because I follow an organization called ISO, which actually does they do the bidding, future bidding for power, and a lot of that goes on, especially here regionally. And one of the questions that I had a chance to ask during a conference call was, what will happen when Pilgrim goes offline? And they're prepared for a little bit of a dip when it goes offline, but there are other alternatives that are stepping up and that are notable and are being purchased. So it's a good thing that you bring that up.
Well, what's interesting too is you're starting to see a push for energy efficiency in every household. So if people have bought that sort of Nest thermostat, that smart thermostat, it will turn your energy usage off and on, up or down, depending on when you're around. I think things like that. I drive a hybrid car, which uses both electricity and gas. And I think things like that, if people make some smart choices in their own household, really help us, conserve a lot of the energy we're going to need going forward.
Let's talk a little bit about, the governor recently just signed a bill, and this had something to do with ballot questions, had a little to do with maybe seeing a little bit of a bump in the minimum wage. Give me your thoughts on the grand bargain.
Right. Well, if people out there know, there was a few ballot questions that were sort of put together as this bargaining agreement a few weeks ago, and what it was the sales tax reduction from 6.25% back to 5%.
Right.
And so that was something that back when I first ran for office, the sales tax had gone from 5 to 6.25. It was supposed to be temporary, which things never seem to be temporary when it comes to taxes.
Like tolls on the pike?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I actually, my campaign team for the U.S. Senate, we volunteered to help collect a lot of the signatures. The Retailers Association of Massachusetts was the one controlling that. So they were the one that had the seat at the table when it came time for the grand bargain. The other two ballot questions that were merged together as part of this was the $15 minimum wage, $15 per hour minimum wage, and then the Family Medical Leave Act, which would allow people to take a certain amount of weeks off to take care of a family member. And of course, that involves an additional cost for the insurance to cover that. Sort of a payroll tax would be covering the cost of that. And so the estimate on that payroll tax was about $800 million.
Oh my.
And so that payroll tax to pay for the Family Medical Leave Act is going to be split between employers and employees, so $400 million on each. There was talk that it may be a lowball estimate as to how much it's going to cost to pay for the actual FMLA, but I think we're gonna see what the true effect is shortly, because it was put into immediate effect. Once they did the grand bargain, they enacted it all at once. So the $15 minimum wage, however, just so people know, we're at $11 now. That will phase in over a period of 4 years, where it's going to go up an additional $1 each year. And then, by the way, for anybody who works as a server, whether it's Dunkin' Donuts or a restaurant as a tipped server, the tipped wage will also go up incrementally as well. It's not the same amount of money. It's a
no, but it'll be better than it is.
It is better, right? So that you're going to have that increase too. The one thing that I was disappointed in was the retailers bargaining away the biggest portion of of what we thought was going to be a real win for taxpayers, which was to roll back the sales tax to 5%. What they decided they wanted in exchange for getting that off the table was doing the sales tax holiday weekend, which equates to about $20 million, $20 to $25 million once a year. The savings to taxpayers, if we had kept the 5%, or rolled back to 5%, would have been closer to $1 billion back in taxpayers' pockets. The other thing that they bargained for was eliminating time and a half on Sundays, the premium rate for workers on Sundays. What we've kind of found is that over time, anybody who works on Sundays, for the most part, if it's a stop and shop, a lot of these organized employees that are in unions, they've already negotiated for higher rates. That doesn't change for them in their contracts. But what does happen is that businesses that operate, let's just say on a weekend, like an ice cream stand that operates maybe just on weekends, what they're put at is an economic disadvantage, because they're automatically having to pay their workers 1.5 times what another business that operates during the week would have. And I understand that a lot of people, the blue laws originally made it so that people could enjoy family time together on Sundays. I think what you're seeing is that the economy and people's work hours have been shifted around and molded to the point where it wasn't necessarily trying to preserve the Sunday anymore. It was just saying that economically it's a disadvantage for certain businesses that only operate on weekends. So that's why that was thrown into the grand bargaining as well. So what you're seeing is some workers' wages increases. You're seeing a chance for people to take off time to be with family, perhaps in their final dying weeks. And then you're seeing a reduction in the sales tax as far as a holiday weekend. It's usually in August, that tax-free holiday weekend.
Right.
Of course, it's not everything, so you can't just go out and buy a car and get
$250,
$2,500.
Thank you.
Exactly.
I couldn't get it out of my mouth, but
Yeah.
you got me. The one thing that irritates me, I shouldn't say irritates me, but that concerns me is this is like big box stores. I wish there was something for restaurants and for smaller mom and pop outlets to be able to.
Well, I did try to do an amendment in the budget to give restaurants a tax-free holiday weekend, just like the retailers, because to be honest with you, restaurants have a pretty tough go of it. About 75% usually fail within the first year or two. It's a tough business. The ones that we all know and love, of course, they've been around for a while, but you see a lot that turn over quite a bit, and unfortunately, there is no real relief for them.
I know it took place a while ago, and you were successful. You came out top dog. Talk to us about the Republican convention.
Yeah, so that's why, for me, this last 4 months here, once we're done with the state rep work, it is a race to November. And that's exciting because, at the convention 2 months ago in Worcester, I won the convention, the Republican endorsement. I had 56% of the vote. My nearest competitor came in at 26%, so full 30-point difference between myself and that opponent. And so we saw that as pretty much as clear a mandate as we could figure, that I'll be the candidate to run against Senator Warren for November. And so, for us, the focus has been trying to make sure that people do know the difference between, the policies I want to enact and do for them down in Washington versus what her track record has been since serving in the Senate. And, again, I think it's also pretty clear that she seems to have an eye towards the White House in 2020. She spent a lot of time out of our state. She's been to Ohio, clearly a swing state for national elections, stumping for a governor there. She was in Nevada just about 2 weeks ago. That's also an early voting state.
She's getting around.
So she is certainly greasing the skids for a run for the White House, and she, I thought, donated about $5,000 to every state Democrat party. Again, I don't know how this helps people of Massachusetts, but it seems to be something that she's working on. So, that's her right to maybe make the runs for the White House in 2020. I think Massachusetts is in a situation where we're looking for someone to work for our state right now, and nothing could be any more important than seeing what's happening with the fishing industry, for example. I've been up to Gloucester, I know for the parade, but I've been up there several times talking to the fishermen down in New Bedford, over in Scituate, where the lobstermen have a lot of boats in their harbor there.
Sure.
What's happening is, whether it's international trade, our lobsters are selling at 9% disadvantage to Canadian lobsters in the European markets, or whether it's the fact that NOAA has held up 40 federal fishing licenses being transferred from a guy named the Codfather. He was Carlos Rafael in New Bedford.
Oh, yeah?
He was a bad actor. He was catching too much of the ground fish that he was allowed to catch, and when he got caught, the federal licenses were pulled. The problem is it's been 8 months and there's a buyer ready to take those licenses. There's a group called the Sector 9 group that all fishing is divided up into sectors now. Sector 9 is the ground fishing. There's a board that oversees that. They are ready to make sure that this never happens again. This whole sector system, by the way, was implemented in 2010 under President Obama, so it's a fairly new thing. There really was no mechanism for them to figure out what to do if there was a bad actor, so they've had this situation, and they've been stalling on getting these licenses transferred. So the Port of Massachusetts right now is losing $35 to $50 million a month on not having those boats out and bringing in the catch. That affects not just the fishermen, but also the subsidiary industries, the ice manufacturers, the fish processing plants, all that in New Bedford, but also Gloucester. They're losing a lot of their fishing capabilities too to international fishermen that are coming to our line and fishing right at the international fishing line because we have very restrictive regulations that were never discussed with our fishing industry. The sector system and then the monument status. Under President Obama, 5,000 square miles of fishing grounds off of our south coast were declared monument status and unfishable. There was no discussion with the fishermen. So that's something that could be worked on right now, and Senator Warren has not injected herself into the discussion. Right. So I think that there's things she could be doing for Massachusetts right now. I need to make sure that if I'm lucky enough to be elected in November, people will know that I will work for the 6-year term. And by the way, she was on Meet the Press with Chuck Todd. He asked her 4 times if she would fulfill the full 6-year term if she's reelected as senator. She wouldn't answer the question. Again, I think this all points to the sign that she clearly wants to run for the White House in 2020.
It's interesting you talk about fishing. It's probably one of the world's oldest industries, and knowing that Massachusetts is being affected where there are limits, and people who have that's their livelihood.
New Bedford is the most valuable fishing port in the United States. The catch that lands on the New Bedford piers has the most value in the entire country, and the scallops are a big part of that. Mm-hmm. I know people watch Deadliest Catch in Alaska, and they think maybe these other ports are the big money makers.
I'm a wicked tuna guy myself.
And Dave Marciano, who has his boat, the Hard Merchandise, is a supporter of mine as well. So, look, it's a lot of these folks in the fishing industry have felt that the federal government hasn't been helping them. I want to make sure they know they have a partner with me if I'm lucky enough to get in.
And it's interesting that you mentioned Dave Marciano, who actually he just welcomed his daughter this season to be part of the boat. So he's got his children who he's trying to teach, the next generation of fishermen.
He got a second boat too. Yeah, no, I mean, he's been very fortunate. He said, he used to be more of a day-to-day fisherman. Now he can do, because of this show, a different sort of lifestyle,
sure.
But he's been very fortunate. But he also has a great knowledge about the fishing industry and has been able to tell me quite a bit about what I need to know to make sure that we're more effective in helping the fishing industry rather than putting more roadblocks in their way.
I guess probably the last thing that I'll have a chance to ask you about is folks who may or may not know, who is Judge Feely, and what is the status with this judge?
Yeah, so that's really another important thing that's happening right now. I don't know if people are aware of this, but in Salem, there was a judge that released somebody who was here as an immigrant who had been dealing heroin, and he didn't give him a jail sentence, and he specifically said that had he been an American citizen, he would have put him in jail, but because he was an immigrant and was going to be subject to deportation, it would have been catastrophic for his family. And the problem was that this person was a known drug dealer in the area up there for years. The community had been trying to get him off the streets. You know, a bunch of us saw this verdict and said, this is unbelievable. You're not only putting him on the streets, but there's a different rule of law. If you're an American citizen, you're actually a lower class than people who have come to this country and you know, could be deported because they're committing these crimes. So I got together with, again, Jim Lyons and several other people in the House. Actually, Democrats picked up, the 2 Democrats signed on to Jim Lyons' bill, and then the Democrats actually filed a secondary bill. And what we're trying to do is have him impeached from the bench because, quite honestly, we feel like his decision-making has been compromised. Not just that, he also lowered the bail of someone who had committed some gun crimes, and the person went out and went up to Maine and shot up a law enforcement officer. You know, when we have gun laws, we should be enforcing them and making sure that those who break those laws go to jail for a long time. But unfortunately, this judge, we looked at his track record, seems to have a history of putting criminals back on the street at a record pace. So the good news is, even the governor, Charlie Baker, recognized that this judge, Tim Feely's decision-making seems to be flawed, and they want a review process. We in the legislature have a process by which we can impeach him by getting the House, Senate, Governor's Council, and Governor to approve it. And so we're trying to go that route as well. But also we want to make sure people know. They can go to a website out there called Impeach Judge Feely. Take a look at what he's done and think about maybe signing on to that because, look, we don't normally do this, question judges about what they do, but when you have someone who's putting people on the streets that's dealing heroin at a time when we are having an epidemic with the opioid crisis, makes no sense to me. And again, when you have 2 sets of laws, makes no sense either.
Love to have you back in for one last show before you wave goodbye. We know the session will be wrapping up in the next couple of weeks, and definitely want to have you back. Anything you want to say to the fine folks who are tuned in now in regards to you getting out there around the Commonwealth and campaigning?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the thing they know about me is that from the time I've been in office, I've tried to make it a point of being out and about talking to everybody. But with the statewide run, you know, of course, I have a schedule of where I'm going to be all around the state now in the next few months. So you need to go to a website we have set up called diehlforsenate.com, DIEHLFOR Senate.com, and there you can see where we're going to be, links to Facebook and Twitter about what I've been doing every day. You can also get a free lawn sign and a bumper sticker sent to you for free, like I said. So you just go there, you fill out a form and click a box and we'll send that to you. But also it's got a lot of information about what I want to do to make sure we secure the border, help our veterans improve the VA system, and make sure that the economy, we continue to keep more money in your pockets because right now things are going extremely well, but we want to make sure that you and your family have a chance to stay here, like I said earlier, and hopefully retire here. And I'm looking forward to a day when my kids have kids and I get that time to enjoy with my grandchildren. So until then, it's been a pleasure talking to you on the 7th Plymouth Crosstalk, but I'm looking forward to maybe some crosstalks for the future U.S. Senate talks.
Oh, that would be fantastic.
Thanks, Kevin.
So I want to thank you so much, and I want to thank you for tuning in as you always do. If you have any questions in regards to the program, any programming that you want to see, www.whca.tv is the way to go. Until next time, have a great day.